headed up by a man who beat COVID by using Alex Jones's super male vitality. This is The Daniel Natal Show. Facing it even bigger than the election itself. First, if Joe Biden gets in and packs the Supreme Court, will the court see that as a challenge to their power? Biden has been very cagey about his intentions on that score.
Sir, I've got to ask you about packing the courts, and I know that you said yesterday you aren't going to answer the question until after the election. But this is the number one thing that I've been asked about from viewers in the past couple of days.
Well, you've been asked by the viewers who are probably Republicans who don't want me continuing to talk about what they're doing to the court right now.
Well, sir, don't the voters deserve to know where you stand?
No, they don't. I'm not going to play his game.
Secondly, the Supreme Court may not see this as an erosion of their power, but rather a vast expansion of it. That is to say, if all elections from here on out are called into question and the Supreme Court gets to essentially appoint presidents, putting their fingers on the scale, then they'll have acquired a titanic new power. They've already in effect arrogated power from the legislative branch, making new laws such as abortion or gay marriage. So if they get to essentially control the executive branch, then they will, within one small group of unelected lawyers, be the puppet masters of the executive branch, the legislative branch, as well as controlling all the courts. This was not the plan in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, the man who co-authored the document, said, quote, "You seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. Our judges are as honest as other men, and not more so. They have with others the same passions for party, for power, and the privilege of their core. Their power is the more dangerous, as they are in office for life, and not responsible as the other functionaries are to the elective control. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal, knowing that to whatever hands confided, with the corruptions of time and party, its members would become despots." To quote Jefferson, "You seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed. So the courts are not supposed to be determining what's constitutional and what's not. The legislators are supposed to do that, not the courts. Their only job is to try limited cases and to apply the laws as written to those cases. Their rulings are not supposed to override the actual laws, or add clauses and phrases written in invisible ink not found in these laws. Their actual powers are much more limited than the establishment would have you believe. In fact, their whole department, as Jefferson calls it, is more limited in scope than you've always been told. For instance, ever since the end of World War II, we've been told that the Supreme Court is a separate co-equal branch of government. But is that true? I mean, even in school, you've been shown versions of the Constitution that break it up into three sections: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. I mean, look at this online electronic copy of the Constitution. See where it says legislative branch? The only problem with that is when you go to the original copy of the Constitution, that phrase isn't in there. See here. So why is someone adding phrases to the Constitution that don't appear in the original document? To find out what our real system is supposed to be like, we have to go back to the foundations of political science. Plato and Aristotle, for instance, say that there were three basic forms of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and republic. These forms decay and break down, monarchy becoming tyranny, aristocracy becoming oligarchy, and republic becoming democracy. So no matter which pure form of government you go with, it'll go sideways given enough time. All systems break down. Cicero in his book De Republica says that a way to mitigate this was to create a hybrid form of government with checks and balances, composed of all three classical forms, with a president standing in place of a monarchy, Senate occupying the position of aristocracy, and House of Representatives being a stand-in for a republic. C. West Cecil talk about Cicero's formulation here.
And so Cicero pulls from this a unique view, and because he's a conservative guy, he says a mixed constitution is best. You don't want just a democracy or just an aristocracy or just a king. You want all of them, which is the kind of constitution Rome had. And he understood that there were problems with this, and he wanted reforms, but basically what he said is a republican model that has democratic elements where the masses have some representation, not too much. An aristocratic element where the wealthiest, the best people, had most of the power, but had checks and balances. And then in the Roman system, there's the consuls, of which, remember, Cicero himself was one, which was this rotating sort of supreme person, although with very limited powers. This may sound familiar to you. We're about to get to that. And so he argued vociferously that what you do is you avoid the worst of all three systems by using the best of all three systems as checks and balances.
So the setup of the United States was very consciously patterned after the blueprint that Cicero set forth in De Republica, a hybrid form of government, three branches based on monarchy, aristocracy, and republic. The Founding Fathers stuck very closely to this formulation with the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. That's three, count them, three branches of government. This was also the setup they were culturally used to from England. The British had a monarch, a House of Lords, and a House of Commons. That's three branches. Note how in England the courts are not a branch of government, just as they aren't in the Roman Republic, and just as they weren't in the United States. Mind you, these countries all did have courts, but they were an administrative layer of the government, like the post office or parks and recreations. The Constitution mentions the post office. That doesn't make it a branch of government. It mentions a navy. Once again, not a branch of government. Just being mentioned in the Constitution does not make you a branch of government. Courts are not an original form of government, according to Plato and Aristotle or Cicero. Monarchies had courts, so did aristocracy, so did republics. It's not an original form of government, hence not a part of the hybrid setup that Cicero describes when he talks about creating an amalgam of monarchy, aristocracy, and republic. None other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg makes a reference to the original conception of the Supreme Court. In a paper she published, she wrote about Judah Benjamin and said in 1853, Benjamin declined the nomination of President Millard Fillmore to become an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Just elected U.S. Senator from Louisiana, Benjamin preferred to retain his first branch post. His choice suggests that the U.S. Supreme Court had not yet become the co-equal branch it is today. Not yet become the co-equal branch it is today? Correct. No one in 1853 considered the court the third branch of government, nor did they consider the Senate and House of Representatives as one double-headed branch. They were very distinct, one being based on aristocracy, the other being based on republic. They had totally different functions. Judah Benjamin, recently elected as senator, saw a position on the Supreme Court as a demotion. The fact is, as Ginsburg alludes, the modern conception of the court is just that, modern. It is not the historical vision of it. The court is not in the blueprint as the third branch of government, not in Cicero, not in any of the Founding Fathers' writings, not even in the early 20th century. Look at it this way. Constitutionally, the President and Senate nominate Supreme Court justices. Is the person being hired equal to the person doing the hiring? No. One is subordinate to the other. The courts aren't in the Constitution picking the president, but the president is in the Constitution picking the courts. He's the one doing the hiring. And in fact, in John Stuart Mill's Considerations on Representative Government, he places the courts underneath the executive branch. They're subordinate to the executive. Think of TV shows like Law and Order. Note how they kind of go together? Mill says that the police are under the executive because the police are part of executing the laws, just as the courts are. So Mill places the courts, like the police, under the jurisdiction of the executive. Not co-equal, and definitely not above. Yet since World War II, we've been trained to think that the courts are not just co-equal, but superior to the president. We're encouraged to think that the president has to ask their permission for everything, and that if the lowest traffic court judge blocks it, the president can't even defend the borders. He's not their master anymore, we're told. He's their servant. When did this happen? When did the court become our de facto unelected shadow government? It happened at around the time the oligarchs bought and suborned them. They loved the idea of unelected lifetime appointees calling the shots, and not the people subject to the elective control, as Thomas Jefferson put it. But being subject to the elective control is the whole point of a representative government, which is what we were set up to be. And now these same forces are apparently trying to bulk up the Supreme Court's power even more. The globalist cabal called the Council on Foreign Relations has long been seeking to subvert the United States and dissolve its sovereignty to create a new global world order. CFR member George Kennan may have supplied a clue as to their plan in an interview with Walter Cronkite televised on CBS on March 31st, 1987. Cronkite introduced presidential advisor Kennan as, quote, one of our genuine wise men, end quote. These were their final remarks on the broadcast. Cronkite, narrating. To help the United States establish a sound foreign policy and stay within its principles, Kennan believes we should have a council of wise men drawn from all areas of national life. Kennan. I think it ought to be a permanent body. It ought to be advisory both to the President and to the Congress, and they should have for the government, for the executive branch, and for the legislative branch, some of the prestige and authority of the opinions of the Supreme Court. In our legal system, we deal on the basis of precedent. If the court has said something, we take it into account. I would like to see that prestige given to such a body. Is the current Supreme Court being morphed into that new body that Kennan was advocating for? Biden has already signaled that he wants to pack the Supreme Court, utterly changing it. But now we're getting word that they want to inflate it from 9 members to 26. Is this the council of wise men that George Kennan envisioned to subvert our constitutional government and forever remove the people from power, now that a group beyond the elective control is in charge? This would constitute a coup, and the official death of our constitutional republic. It would no longer be representative government. Rule by judges is not in Cicero's blueprint, nor was it in any way, shape, or form the cultural heritage our founding fathers got from the English setup, nor was it how they organized our government to operate. This election may be a pretext for a monumental power grab, one that poses an existential threat to the Constitution, vesting all powers in one small unconstitutional body, where unelected people hold all the powers previously given to our President, Senate, and House of Representatives. It will signal an end to checks and balances, and place us under what Jefferson called the despotism of an oligarchy. We'll be watching how this unfolds on The Daniel Natal Show. The elites stink. They hate it when we push their buttons. Help us to push their buttons by pushing our buttons, the like and subscribe buttons. Also, don't forget about thenewamerican.com. Think of the magazine less as a newspaper than as a newspaper. You know, like the Greek nous, knowledge. Note to self, multilingual Greek puns don't work.